Magic, white and black, the science of finite and infinite life. A thought once formed exists as an image in the mirror of eternity. To remember a thought is to look for it in the astral light and to behold it there. The astral light is the book of nature, where every thought becomes engraved and every event recorded. The stars on the sky exist, and everyone may see them. Likewise, ideas exist like stars on the inner sky of the universal mind, shedding their rays into the minds of men, and he who is able to open his eyes sufficiently can behold them there. No one can monopolize an idea. They are accessible to all who can grasp them, and they are sometimes grasped simultaneously by receptive minds. No one can create a body out of nothing. No one can create an idea. All that men can do is to take the already existing materials and to put them into new shapes. A man who thus evolves a new and grand idea kindles a new star in the heavens whose light may be seen by everyone. Not only do the thoughts of men impress themselves into the astral light, but the universal mind takes cognizance of everything that exists, and every event that takes place on the physical plane is recorded in the memory of nature. Every stone, every plant, every animal, as well as every man, has a sphere in which is recorded every event of its existence. Each is like a light of which we can see only the grossly material wick, but neither the flame nor its luminous sphere of living light. In the astral light of each is stored up every event of its past history and of the history of its surroundings, so that everything, no matter how insignificant it may be, can give an account of its daily life, from the beginning of its existence as a form up to the present, to him who is able to read. A piece of lava from Pompeii may give to the psychometer a true description of the volcanic eruption that devastated that town and buried it under its ashes, where it remained hidden for nearly 2,000 years. A floating timber carried by the Gulf Stream to the far north may give to the inhabitants of the north a true picture of tropical life. And a piece of bone of a mastodon may teach the vegetable and animal life of antediluvian periods. The pictures impressed in the astral light react upon the mental spheres of individual minds and may create in them emotional disturbances, even if these pictures do not come to the full consciousness of their minds. Deeds committed with a great concentration of thought call living pictures in the astral light into existence that may cause impressible persons to commit similar acts. If the true nature of the constitution of man were properly understood, capital punishment would soon be abandoned as perfectly useless, unjust, and contrary to the law of nature. That which commits an unaliving or any other crime is a conscious and invisible power which cannot be unalived, and which does not improve in character by being separated from its external form. The body is innocent. It is merely an instrument in the hands of the invisible culprit, the inner man. The face of even a criminal bears an expression of peace when the soul has departed. By severing the bonds between this intellectual and vicious power and the physical form, we do not change its tendency to act evil. But while during the life of the body the action of that power was restricted to only one form, having been liberated, it may now incite numerous other weak-minded people to perform the same crime for which the body was executed. Thus, by capital punishment, evil is not abolished, but its sphere of action increased. As far as the theory of influencing other would-be criminals with fear by making an example of one, thus to prevent others from committing crimes, is concerned, it is well known that criminals do not look upon any punishment as being something which they have deserved for their deeds, but as being a consequence of having been so careless as to allow themselves to be caught, and they usually make up their minds that if they were permitted to escape, they would be more careful not to be caught again.
Open the door! Police department, search warrant! Open the door!
The destruction of a form is entirely useless for the purpose of annihilating the principle which it represents, because the form is not the character, nor can the destruction of the form in any way improve or ameliorate that character. He who steals away the life of any being, whether legally or illegally, merely destroys the conditions under which a spark of the divinity was striving to unfold its light and to obtain consciousness, and he thereby commits a crime against God. while the punishment of the culprit exists nowhere except in his imagination, because if he is not afraid to pass away, death will be no punishment to him. All that taking someone's life can possibly accomplish is to produce a change of external effects, creating thereby internal causes which are far more injurious, even if they are less evident. We are against taking someone's life for the sake of convenience, but on the other hand, we would not subscribe to that sentimental policy that never wards off a blow and submits to be unalived. He who permits himself to be unalived by another is committing murder through him. From a misunderstanding of the relations existing between a principle and the form in which it finds its expression, result the most ludicrous effects. Not the least of which are the vagaries of those who attempt to improve the condition of the world by doctoring the external effects of internal causes, whereby invariably worse evils come into existence. If we wish to prevent the growth of an evil tree, it is of little use to lop off the leaves and the twigs, or even to hide the tree behind a serene. The living force in the roots and in the trunk will act with renewed strength, producing new branches and leaves which the screen cannot cover from sight. All forms are nothing but symbols by which internal principles find their expression. To successfully change a form, it must be endowed with a new principle. We may melt iron 1,000 times. We cannot transform it into gold, nor could we transform a sinner into a saint if we were to baptize him with all the water that runs into the sea. But we only make a piece of iron magnetic by endowing it with magnetism, and a villain may become honest if the light of the true understanding enters his heart. Each being in nature represents a mental state in a certain condition of vibration. Each represents a melody in the great symphony of the music of the spheres, and as one sound of an instrument may cause a similar vibration in a corresponding instrument. Likewise, the principle expressed in one form may call a similar principle in another form into action. If mankind as a whole were so far awakened from their slumber as to be able to recognize the existence of eternal principles, instead of merely beholding the perishing form, then would the golden era begin and the paradise be again established upon the earth. Then would they cease to run after illusions and shadows or to put their faith into worthless objects. Then would they behold the Holy Spirit in everything and the Redeemer within themselves. Then would the world be transformed by the magic power of love, and the darkness of ignorance be changed into the light of knowledge by the influence of the rays of divine wisdom. But what else can an eternal principle be, except a state of living will tinctured by divine thought? Even the highest spiritual beings and planetary spirits can be nothing else but self-conscious thoughts of God, vehicles for the divine will and instruments for its manifestation, all being obedient to divine law, order and harmony, without which they could not be divine or eternal. God does not need the world to enable him to be what he is, but nature requires God to enable her to exist. The principle of life requires no form, but forms need the principle of life to enable it to live. Likewise, eternal love and justice and truth are self-existent, self-sufficient and independent of any object or form. But they cannot manifest themselves without appropriate forms, and the forms that require them to enable them to love, to be just and true. In other words, God is independent of his creation, but creation is dependent on him. Thus the sun could exist without our earth, but the earth not without the sun. A man can be without truth, but eternal truth nevertheless remains what it is, even if there were no one to recognize it.